Hello, welcome to the Steel Studio podcast. I'm Rick.
And I'm Mike.
And we are here with Joe Zagorski. Very excited about this. He wrote the book, The NFL in the 70s, Pro Football's Most Important Decade. We're honored to interview you and discuss your book. Joe, what was the motivation for this book?
Oh, gosh. It took 6 years to write it, so it was a long time ago. And I pretty much just wrote it on my free time. I wanted to, I grew up in the 70s, like a lot of, kids in the 70s, you fell in love with pro football and the sport of football during that time. And I just wanted to write some kind of a nostalgic book about the decade. There had been other books about the 70s that were written, but nothing that was really that comprehensive. And I just thought that every year had something really great to offer. So it took time, and I started putting it together piece by piece. And then by chance, one day I happened to come across a publisher who asked me to send him some of the stuff that I've written on it. And within a few weeks, I had a contract in my hands. So I figured, well, if I get this contract, then I guess it means I have to finish it. But wow. It was just something. I just liked the 70s, and I just thought that it would help me to, springboard anything in the future about writing about football, because that's my favorite decade.
So we're obviously big Steelers fans, as you know, of course, and the book covers the Steelers quite a bit since they were a 70s dynasty.
Right.
And Rocky Bleier, he contributed to the book. How did you guys go about that, and what was it like working with him?
Okay, well, it's kind of a long story, so bear with me. But the one thing that I wanted to do is, because it was my first book, and nobody knew who I was. In fact, a lot of people don't know who I am now. I've written three books so far, but I wanted to have somebody write a foreword, somebody recognizable. And so I thought, who's the most recognizable person of the 1970s that played most of the entire decade? And I thought, well, the first guy I'll ask is Roger Staubach, quarterback of the Cowboys. So I wrote to him and I asked him, and his secretary wrote back saying he's too busy. So I wrote to Fran Tarkenton, quarterback of the Vikings, and his secretary wrote back, same thing, too busy. So then I asked Brent Musburger of the NFL Today, and we never got any response. So then I thought, what about Rocky Bleier? He played most of the decade. In fact, he played all the decade, and he's articulate. He can write. He knows. He went to Notre Dame, for crying out loud. So I wrote to Rocky, and he said, sure. And I'm thinking, all right. So a week after Rocky says, yeah, Brent Musburger calls me up. And I said, I'm sorry, Brent. I you're a week too late. Rocky Bleier already, said yes. And Brent says, oh, that's okay. He's a good choice. He's a good guy, So famous Brent Musburger called me up, and I had to tell him no. So Rocky and I, he did a great job, and we did a book signing together at Jerome Bettis's restaurant a little bit after the book came out in 2016, and it was freezing that night in Pittsburgh. I think it was 7 degrees outside, but my car still started, and we had a great time. We sold all the books, and everybody noticed Rocky because they know what he looks like. And there were a couple of Christmas parties going on at the same time. And, everybody wanted to get their picture taken with Rocky. Nobody wanted to get their picture taken with me. But that doesn't matter. But anyway, you want your picture taken with Rocky? Fine, buy the book. He'll sign it for you.
There you go.
It was a great day for the free market. But I found out a lot about Rocky and about some of the stories I had always wondered, and one of them involved, the greatest play in pro football history, the Immaculate Reception. And I said, Rocky, and I looked at the film of it 100 times, and you're on the sideline, what do you remember about it? What did you see? Because there's great conspiracy. Did he touch it? Didn't he touch it? Whatever. And Rocky leans over to me and he whispers in my ear like it's something he's ashamed of, or it's something that he doesn't want the truth to come out. But he goes, in all honesty, I had my back turned. And I'm thinking to myself, the greatest play in pro football history, and you had your back turned. But then I realized, how did we know it was going to be the greatest play in football? I mean, seriously. So, and Rocky said, I was the last person down at the end zone because I had my back turned. Everybody else had already ran down there.
Wow.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy. I hope, a lot of these players, unfortunately, are passing away left and right in this year. I hope he lives for another 3 or 4 more decades. He's a great guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like it. Hopefully we get to, meet him sometime. In your book, you featured a lot of teams, but in your opinion, do you think the Steelers were defined as the team of the 70s, or would that be someone else?
No, the Steelers definitely earned that title. You can look at records and, the Cowboys, the Raiders, the Rams, the Vikings, the Dolphins, they all had pretty good records. But when you look at the fact that the Steelers won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, and I believe all but the first 2 years of the decade they were in the playoffs, I mean, it's a hard record to break to knock, and the way that they dominated the game, you really had teams afraid to play them. You had your lesser teams that were fearful. That's how you dominate. You get those players on other teams to already know before they play you that they're going to lose. And 75 Steelers were that dominant. 78 Steelers were that. 76 Steelers, they didn't win the title, but nobody wanted to play them in the second half of that year. What did they have? 5 shutouts? Incredible.
Wow.
I mean, try getting. I mean, defense doesn't get played any much these days because it can't. The league has pretty much manufactured defense out of the game. But in '76, you're getting 5 shutouts. I don't care who you're playing. That's an incredible thing. It'll never be broken.
Wow.
That is pretty cool. I mean, to have a dominant decade like that. Hopefully we can do that again sometime here soon. So far this year.
I was going to say that Steelers are on their way to doing it right now.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed. I'll knock on wood just to not jinx it.
The idea is to win games even when you're not playing your best. And that's what they're doing.
Exactly.
That is certainly true. Yeah. So if we change it up just a little bit, talk O.J. Simpson for a second. He was the first player to ever have 2,000 yards in a season, and he was obviously an amazing runner. That's kind of been forgotten just due to his personal issues off the field. But would you say that he's the player of that decade?
Yes. He led the league in rushing 4 out of 5 years. So that won't ever happen again. I mean, it happened, I think, in Jim Brown's day, but outside of OJ, I just don't see it happening again. I don't think it has. Buffalo didn't have a lot, when he was playing. They were primarily a running team by the time he won the league rushing title in 72. And in 73, when he got his 2,000 yards, he finally had a decent offensive line. But their defense was giving up a lot of points. A friend of mine, unfortunately, passed away, Donnie Green, who used to play offensive tackle for the Bills during that time. He told me that Lou Saban, the head coach at that time, told the offense, look, guys, the defense isn't going to stop anybody. You guys got to outscore everybody. And if you look in the records, no team scored more points during the course of a decade than the 75 Buffalo Bills. They scored the most points in one season. You would think, the Chargers with Dan Fouts. And no, the 75 Buffalo Bills, team that didn't go to the playoffs. They led the league in scoring for 1 year. and they were scoring a lot of points, but their defense was giving up a lot. That shows you that defense wins titles.
Yes, it does. Hey, Joe, so much information in this book. I grew up in the 70s as well. What a time.
Mm-hmm.
Smell the grass. Football was football. It just seemed so much different then. But how big was that AFL merger with the NFL for the popularity of the league? And was the AFL more of a wide-open passing attack?
It was, and it did a lot. It did a lot for the credibility of the league because, all of a sudden the league was 16 teams. You added the 10 teams that for the AFL, and then now you've got 26 teams. More of the country started to see a combined league, where everybody was on the same page. Now, granted, you had more dynasties and you had more one-sided games, but you didn't have to have an argument. Which was better, the AFL or the NFL? Well, they were different in a lot of different ways. Of course, you mentioned, AFL was more wide open. That's true. But now you had one general league. And, of course, with the television contracts that were signed in 1970, that really just jump-started everything. I loved the 70s watching the game because we didn't know what was in the future. We didn't have an idea that today you can't escape football. It's on 24/7, even in the summertime. But when we were growing up in the 70s, once the Pro Bowl was done, that was it. You didn't hear a thing about pro football until the summer training camp again. And so it was something that you were really, really waiting for. It was an ambitious type of a thing, and I treasure those moments because we'll never see that again. It's gotten so oversaturated now that, but it's still, people just set their clock by it, and even with no people in the stands during this year, people are still watching it on television. I know a lot of people say that they're not watching it because they're upset with the league and whatever. I think people are still watching it. They just won't admit it.
Yeah, they are.
I mean,
it's weird. Right. It's weird now, though, because you win a Super Bowl, and then the next day they're talking about the next season already. You can't enjoy it like you did back then. It's weird. I don't know.
That's true, and you really can't afford to because of the competition. If you snooze, you lose. That's the way it is.
Joe, were there any teams that back then that didn't want the AFL? There had to be teams that didn't want this. We don't want this league joining our league, and the hardcore guys.
There were probably some owners that didn't, but the players, the players on the whole, they went to college with a lot of these guys that played in the AFL, and they understood. Money talks, and they knew that when a team is going to offer Joe Namath $400,000 in the mid 1960s, when the NFL couldn't offer him anything near that, you're going to go to where the money is. That's why Larry Zonka and Jim Kick and Paul Warfield left for the WFL after the '74 season. Joe Robbie of the Dolphins, that owner, he couldn't afford to give them what the WFL was giving them for 1 year, so they jumped ship. I think some of the owners weren't too happy, but time has proven them to be wrong because the league has grown by leaps and bounds after the merger, and I think they did the right thing. And I remember interviewing a Hall of Fame defensive back for the Kansas City Chiefs, Johnny Robinson, a while back for the book, and he told me that one of the younger guys on the team didn't know anything about the rivalry between AFL and NFL. it was almost passé by the time the 70s came around. So I think some of the owners might, and I don't know which ones, but most of the players didn't, I don't think, have a problem with it.
So, Joe, the 1970s was when Monday Night Football started, and names started going on the back of jerseys, among other things. How much did the vision of Commissioner Pete Rozelle change the league?
I think it added a lot to the league. He was a public relations guy, first and foremost. And so a lot of the stuff that he did was to promote the league. And he wasn't above trying something new that even advisors of his would say, don't do this. He would still try different things. And, if it was bold and if it was colorful, he'd go for it. If you look at, now today in the Super Bowl, you have these halftime shows that are extravaganzas that feature a famous person or whatever, famous performer. But back in the 60s and 70s, when Pete Rozelle was commissioner of pro football, the NFL, and then pro football as a whole, he would try some crazy stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with this Up With People group that played actually halftime show at Super Bowl X, Steelers and Cowboys, the first Steelers and Cowboys Super Bowl. And, a lot of people derided that as being really ridiculous. But Pete invited them back, I think, 2 more times to play in Super Bowls. So he tried different things, and of course, like you said, the Monday Night Football, that I don't know of any kid in the 70s that wasn't watching Monday Night Football. Some of the biggest arguments I had in my household growing up as a kid was begging my mother to let me stay up past halftime of Monday Night Football. Because, it's a school night. You have to go to school. I don't care about school. I'm 10 years old. I want to watch football. So, but what are you going to do? Pete Rozelle for my money, he was the best commissioner that the NFL ever had, and I really kind of wish that his kind was back right now being the commissioner, because I'm not in the Goodell camp, so to speak.
We aren't either.
So there were a lot of great quarterbacks in the 70s, of course. If you had to pick your favorite, who would it be and why?
Oh, the favorite one. Oh, gee. I don't know if I really had a favorite. I know there were great ones. Obviously, you had your Bradshaws, Bob Greasy, Staubach, Tarkenton, and several others. But there were some that made history just, for even one game. Clint Longley of the Dallas Cowboys won a Thanksgiving Day game over the Redskins with 3 touchdown passes. As far as my favorite, probably have to go with Staubach, because he didn't lay on the field and writhe around in pain and cry to the referees and stuff. That was a big thing for me, is just, hey, he's not going to complain about getting sacked, but as far as, sheer, arm strength, you have to go with Bradshaw. He had the arm strength. Super Bowl wins, of course, you got to go with Bradshaw. As far as ability to read a defense, I think Bob Greasy is up there with Fran Tarkenton. There's some really great ones that, didn't really get a whole lot of notoriety, but still did really well. Who really gets probably a little bit too much exposure is Joe Namath, who in the 70s, that wasn't his decade. His final year was 77, but he really didn't have – he had a really good season in 72. He suffered a lot of injuries, and only, I think the closest thing he came to a winning season was 74, when the team finished 7-7. So, there's some surprises and some, things that you would think were, statistically, this is the reason why this person is one of the best or whatever. The statistics don't tell the whole story. I'd have to say, to answer your question, Staubach was my favorite, but there were a lot of great ones.
My favorite was the Snake, Ken Stabler. Actually, it was Bradshaw, but I like Stabler.
I forgot all about him. Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about those great Steeler teams. Who was their biggest rivalry in the 70s, and how brutal were those games?
Has to be the Raiders, without a doubt. The Steelers had rivalries with other teams too, don't get me wrong, but there was nothing more warlike than a Steelers-Raiders game in the mid-1970s. You knew that you were going to get hit. You knew that you were going to probably spend a long time in a whirlpool after the game. And I can't remember who said it, but they said that whenever, you played the Steelers in the 70s, it wasn't whether you won or lost, it was whether or not you had Blue Cross. So the Steelers and the Raiders, those two teams, they just hated each other. And I remember, I'll tell you this story. Terry Hanratty, former Steelers quarterback, told me this story. And,
I love Terry.
He's a great guy. And many years after he retired, they had these things called these flag football games. And somebody got the idea, I guess it was in the 80s, late 80s, to have a flag football game in the Oakland Coliseum between the Steelers and the Raiders. This is during the same night that there's a World Series game in San Francisco across the bay. Like 40,000 people show up at this Steelers-Raiders flag football game.
Wow.
And he said that when the Steelers came out of the tunnel, the 40,000 fans there booed the bleep out of them. I won't say the word. And he goes, it was like going home again. It's like you can't go home again. Yes, you can. It was just like the old days. They were booing the bleep out of us.
Wow, I've never heard that.
Yeah, he told me that one. I said, oh my God, that's incredible. That's what that rivalry did. A couple of decades later, and there you go. It's just something else.
Wow. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Joe, just how good were the 72 Dolphins? Do you think another team will ever be undefeated like that all the way through again?
To answer your second question, I do think another team will be undefeated. And I just see it happening. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, truth be told. I thought the Patriots had a real good chance, but was it for Eli Manning, they would have. I think that the 72 Dolphins, to say, argue with perfection, 17-0. But, the fact of the matter is that they had a light schedule. They did not play a lot of tough teams in that regular season. And they beat Buffalo by 1 point in one game at the Orange Bowl, no less, 24-23, in a game that they probably should have lost. And then they barely beat the Cleveland Browns in the division playoffs 20-14. If it wasn't for one late rally at the end, they would have lost that one. So they didn't play a whole lot of tough teams, but they didn't lose either. So, they were good from the aspect of undefeated. You can't argue with the fact that they never lost a game, but they weren't a powerhouse. They weren't going to destroy teams. There was one team they did destroy. I think they beat New England. I think it was 52-10 one game. But most of the games were close games. They struggled with some of them. So to say that the 72 Dolphins were the be-all, end-all, they didn't lose anything, but they overpower teams, and I do think that some team in the future will eclipse their 17-0 mark. I don't know if I'll be alive to see it, but
let's hope it's the Steelers this year.
I've asked. It's a topic now, and I'm pretty sure that the players are probably getting tired of answering it, because now they're going to hear it every single week. I don't care. Even Coach Tomlin's going to hear it every single week. But I looked at their schedule, and if they stay healthy, they could run the table. Now, that's in the regular season.
Right.
A Steeler Kansas City AFC title game looks like it's on the horizon.
You go either way.
It could happen. So we'll see. Hello? You guys
there,
cut
Mike?
out.
You there, Mike? Uh-oh. Hey, Joe, you there?
I'm here. I'm still here.
I don't know if he's be able to record. You there, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Did you hear my most recent question?
No.
I didn't.
Oh. Yeah, I was asking, what would you say was the most influential year within the 70s in terms of the rise of the NFL?
I can't name one. I'd have to name two. 1974 and 1978. Both for the same reasons. The rules changes meant a lot in those 2 years. A lot of different rules were changed in 74 and 78. In 74, you had the overtime rule. You had the nobody leaving the line of scrimmage until a ball is punted rule. You had kickoffs being brought. Kickoffs starting from the 35-yard line as opposed to the 40, and in 78 you had legalized holding, which meant you could grasp a defensive lineman's jerseys. You had the Mel Blount rule, which means that after 5 yards you weren't allowed to touch a receiver, which they still did. But it was because of the rules that they were changed so much during 74 and 78. That had a lot to mean that they were very, very influential years. And I don't care what you say, the people that are playing today, the ramifications of the 78 rule changes are still with us. Especially with not grasping the defensive linemen's jerseys. Holding, gets called a lot more, but, the penalties for holding back in the early 70s, they were 15 yards. You get a holding penalty. Yeah, you get a holding penalty. That's no wonder why there was less scoring back then.
Drive killer.
Yeah. So they shortened that to 10 yards, and lo and behold, scores got higher. And of course, with the passing yardage in 78, holy cow! I think there was, I can't remember the name of the receiver. It could have been Ahmad Rashad. I don't know. It could have been Harold Carmichael. I think it was him. He went from like 400 yards receiving to like 1,000 yards receiving in 1 year because of the 78 rule changes.
Wow.
It was incredible. So, and of course, in 78, you also had something else. The game went from a 14-game regular season to a 16-game regular season. Now, a lot of the coaches weren't too happy about that because that meant that they had 2 less preseason games with which to judge talent on. And if you were a player, especially a rookie trying to make a team, you had better show that team from the early on outset that you were worthy of keeping around. At least, with a 6-game preseason schedule, you didn't have to show them right away. You could show them throughout the rest of the preseason, but you didn't have that kind of time. And the 16-game regular season schedule, it took its toll on teams. Colleges, what do they have, 12 games maximum if you go to a bowl game? Well, all
Right.
of a sudden, if you're in a playoff team in the NFL, you're playing at least 17 games, and if you keep winning 18 and 19 games, that's a lot to ask a rookie to adjust to. So there's a lot of changes in 74 and 78.
Joe, how do you compare the teams of today with the free agency and out movement? I don't think you'll ever have teams like you had back then when they stayed together like they did.
You're right. You won't. You're absolutely right. I really doubt that you'll ever see that era again. And back then you would keep a player around even if because just for the camaraderie of the team, the cohesion of the team. The biggest problem with that is whenever a team owner changed coaches. The coaches would change coaching staffs, those new coaches would, and they would start bringing in different players that they were familiar with. And that's what happened to a lot of teams that didn't succeed in the 70s. You look at their teams and the turnover that they had, they didn't keep the same coaching staffs year after year after year. But you had teams that were winning. Tom Landry was head coach of the Cowboys throughout the 70s. Chuck Noll, Steelers, John Madden, Raiders, Don Shula, I could go on and on.
Right.
But Philadelphia Eagles, you had Jerry Williams, Ed Kayat, you had Mike McCormick. It wasn't until you finally had Dick Vermeil that you had some stability, and they started winning. So, until teams started keeping the camaraderie and the cohesion around with the coaching staff, the same coaching staff, and believe in that coaching staff's vision, then then you would win. But if you didn't, if you were too impatient to win, you usually didn't, and that's the result.
Right. Well, it certainly was a great time, and in our history of the NFL, and we appreciate you coming on. And the book is the NFL in the 70s, Pro Football's Most Important Decade. Joe, where can people find the book if they want to purchase this?
Best place is Amazon, but online that's really it's been out since 2016. So Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, BooksAMillion.com. Those are the three main reputable places to buy it.
Awesome, and we'll put a link on our site for it too. So, but we appreciate you coming on. We hope to talk to you again sometime.
Hey, sure thing. Thanks for inviting me, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
You too, Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.